All right. Well, we had a bunch of people sign up, and I know a lot of them had said that they were planning, had to work or whatever, and said they were going to watch the video later. So we might have a small group this morning, but that's all right. I like that. Well, why don't we go through really quick and introduce ourselves first before we get started? Let me just make sure all of my settings are right here. Okay, so my name's Paul. I'm one of the co-founders of Art Makes Us. I do primarily oil paintings, but I also do digital art, and I've worked in acrylic and watercolor. I do a little bit of everything. So I love doing these kinds of classes because it's very open. I'll be working on a painting. You're welcome to paint the same thing as me, or if you want to paint something different, you can just hang out and work on your own thing. That's fine too. And I'm happy to help with any kind of, suggestions or feedback as we go along. I love chatting while I'm working. I'm very, very chatty. So that's me in a nutshell. Why don't we go through and let you all introduce yourselves? If anyone's feeling shy and doesn't want to, that's okay too. But Sterling, how about you?
Hey, well, I'm going to follow you because I need all the help I can get. I'm just starting art and it got me through the pandemic and it's fun.
Oh, wonderful. That's a great, I just started teaching art online during the pandemic, and I think that's fun too. I've been teaching, my whole career, but I've never taught this way before, and I ended up really liking it. So I think that this is a pretty cool thing. So welcome. All
Yeah.
right. Let me see if Litsa, is that how to pronounce your name?
Yeah. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I hear you
Okay,
great.
good. So I'm actually taking a drawing class right now, and the person in the classroom recommended your class,
Oh, how
and so
nice.
I might be drawing the landscape instead of painting it today,
I
but
love
then
that. That's great.
painting it next. So that's my plan.
Who's
So
which drawing class are you taking?
through Multnomah Arts Center in Portland, Oregon.
Oh
Uh,
no, I don't.
so
Was it Deb Burke by any chance who you talked to?
no, it's not.
Oh, huh. Well, I don't know. I'm glad the word's getting out. However,
Yeah.
it's reaching you. That's great. I have a good friend named Deb in Portland, and she actually teaches a drawing class for us. So if you ever want to do a virtual drawing class, her class is on Wednesdays, and she is awesome.
Okay. All
Um,
right. Thank
she, I,
you.
I was just talking to her yesterday, and she was trying to convince me to move to Portland.
Okay.
It's a
Is
pretty
it
great place.
it might be her mother that I'm having the drawing class with,
Oh,
but I'm
okay.
I'm not sure. So
Oh, that's cool. Well,
okay,
however you got here,
great.
welcome. And drawing is great. Any medium that you want to work with. A lot of what I talk about when I'm doing these classes really applies to anything. I try to speak very generally and not get too like medium specific unless people have, specific questions about that.
Well, I'm taking the drawing class to hopefully make me a better oil painter, which is where I really want to be. So this is a good combination. So thank
Oh,
you.
yeah. The drawing is the foundation for everything. So
Mhm.
that's wonderful. All
Thank you.
right. And Cynthia, would you like to introduce yourself?
She's muted. Oh, there she goes.
I unmuted.
It's up to you. No pressure.
I'm not presentable, but I can talk.
That works. It is early.
I'm local in Monterey Bay, and we have a mutual acquaintance, you and I, Brenda.
Oh, I love Brenda.
Yeah. And over the pandemic, I think I realized, I've always wanted to paint. I've done all this other art, but what I really wanted to do was paint. And I was just like, I don't want to say chicken, but okay, so let's see. I do sculpture. I've made jewelry for a number of years. I do graphics for nonprofits. But anyway, long story short, when this came up, I thought, I don't think I've ever had so this is how you paint landscape. I think I took painting classes that left me going, damn, they didn't even tell me how to hold a brush, let alone here's how you work with a limited palette. It was just like, go buy 50 painting tubes and then pretend that you're drawing with a brush. I was like, no. So anyway, I thought, in what world can it hurt me, since I'm going out and doing plein air, to actually have an idea of what, like what the fundamentals are of landscape painting.
Oh, wonderful. And if you're getting ready to do plein air, then this will be great. Plein
I
air
have
is
actually been doing it badly. Like I tell myself I'm going to go out and paint badly, and I love it.
That's wonderful. I try to tell all my students not to be afraid of making some bad art because that's how
Yeah.
you get to the good art.
Well, and it's the heck out of not making any art, right? So I'm like, I'm not going to get better by not doing it. I have proven that. I've been not doing it for 30 years. So
Yeah, you don't get very far that way, that's for sure.
No, you don't. And then when I saw the price for this class, I was like, oh my God, Yeah. So here I am.
Good. I'm glad that you all can be here with us. That's great. All right, I'm going to spotlight my, there we go. Hi up there. All right, so hopefully you all are seeing my little canvas here, and this is my palette, and I'll just kind of talk you through what I'm doing. You all should have received an email with an image of the painting that I'll be doing today. It's not necessary that you have it up. I mean, I'll be kind of working through the process anyhow, but if you'd like to, go grab that, you're welcome to. But anyhow, so I'm working with oil paints today. That's my favorite. And I put out a bunch of colors, and I'll tell you which colors I'm using. If you are working in plein air, it's recommended to use a much more limited palette than this. Plein air, for anybody who doesn't know, is when you're actually going out into nature and painting the landscape from life. And so you want to keep your supplies as minimal as possible when you're doing that. And so it's usually recommended to just have a couple warm colors, a couple cool colors, just the main colors that you imagine needing in that setting. But when I'm working in my studio, like today, I put out a little bit more because I'm very color oriented. I love color. So I'll show you what I have here. And if you're working with oil, maybe this will be helpful for you, or if you want to work with oil one day. First of all, I have my little jar of Turpenoid, which is what I use to clean out my brush in between. Odorless Turpenoid is what I use, and I just put it in a glass jar, this case of horseradish. And then this little glob of stuff right here is called, Liquin. And it is the painting medium that I use. It kind of comes out in a thick glob, which is what I like. There's also a fine detail version of Liquin that is more liquidy. So basically the difference between these two things, the jar is what I use to clean out my brush in between colors. And then the Liquin, is what I use to thin the paint and when I'm actually in the process of painting. So, and then the colors that I have put out are alizarin crimson, that's a dark, deep red, and then cadmium red light, which is kind of on the verge of orange, which I really like. Yellow ochre, which is very kind of neutral yellow color. Now, first of all, for anybody who is following along with me, don't panic if you don't have all of these colors. I literally just, when I'm painting, I grab whatever I have and put a little bit of it out because I love color that much. But you can make this painting with whatever you have handy. This is just cadmium yellow light. This is Viridian, which is a deep green. Cerulean blue, which is kind of like a really pretty sky blue color. Ultramarine blue, very dark. And then burnt umber, dark brown. Burnt sienna, kind of a reddish brown. And titanium white. It's a lot, huh? You don't need all of this. You could probably do this painting, today's painting, with one of the blues, probably the cerulean, one of the yellow. I would go with the lighter one because you could always darken it. Maybe just burnt sienna, and probably just the lighter red, cadmium red, and of course white. You can mix a lot of the other colors. If you have the primary colors, red, blue, and yellow, you can mix everything else that you need. All right, so now I'm going to dive right in because 2 hours is not a lot of time here. And the first thing I'm going to do, I don't like to paint on a white canvas. And I also like to have a little bit of something on the canvas because it helps the other brush strokes in the future to just sort of be soaked in a little bit better. So I like to just start off by using a lot of liquid and just taking some of my burnt sienna or whatever color you want, it really doesn't matter, and just putting a base coat on the canvas. So this will be very quick. This is optional. If you are doing watercolor or a more transparent medium, I would not suggest doing something like this because with watercolor, you're actually trying to use the white of the paper as your highlight. But with oil or acrylic, more opaque mediums like that, I like to go darker and then kind of pull the lights up from that. So this is not necessary, but I like it. So I'm going to do it real quick. Feel free to ask questions or chat with me as I go along here too. I mean, I can talk, I can talk your ear off, but I also am happy to listen and help in any way I can or whatever you want to talk about.
Are my paints going to dry up?
What medium are you using? Oil?
Acrylic.
Acrylics tend to dry a little quicker. Yeah, definitely a lot quicker than oils. You can, if you have a spray bottle handy, you could,
Okay.
just with water, you can kind of mist your palette ever so often, and that'll help keep them alive a little bit longer.
Okay.
It won't help you today, but you can also, at art stores, you can purchase this, what do they call it? Some kind of a medium that you mix with your acrylic paint, and it actually makes it dry a lot slower. So
A retarder.
yes, that's it. I don't do a whole lot of acrylic painting, so I don't have that, but I have students who swear by it. All right, so now I've covered my canvas. I'm just going to take a paper towel and kind of work it in a little bit because I don't want it to be so wet that it makes it difficult to paint my next layer. All right, well, so far you've gotten your money's worth, huh? I've shown you how to paint a canvas a solid color. Yay! Class dismissed. All right, so now I'm going to sketch in the image, and I like to sketch with paint a lot of the time, but you can also sketch with pencil. You can sketch with charcoal, whatever works best for you. And with landscapes in particular, I don't do a lot of sketching. I try to get the main lines, but that kind of separate the planes of the image, but I don't really obsess over the details because I like to work a lot of that out with the paint. So the first thing I'm going to look at is kind of the distant horizon line. So there's a mountain or a hill in the distance of the scene, and I want to figure out where that is. And a trick that you can use if you're working from a reference like this is to almost kind of create a mental grid for yourself. Try and just visually estimate where the middle of the canvas is, and then look at your reference and do the same thing, and then see how far up do these different points fall. So when I do that, that mountain at the top looks like it is a little bit above the quarter mark. So if this is half, this is quarter, that mountain in the distance is a little bit above that. So I'm just going to very lightly sketch that in with my brush. I sketch very loose. It'll all be covered with paint anyhow, so it doesn't matter. Some artists, when they're doing very detailed scenes, will, if they're working from a reference, they'll use a grid or some other system like that. I think with landscape. Oh, go ahead.
The picture we're doing, just.
Oh, sure. Let me pull it up here. And if you guys want, I can also send it to you through the chat too. Find it.
Just curious.
Yeah, it might be nice to know where this train is headed, huh?
Yeah.
Okay. Here, let me share my screen and I'll show you. There it is. Field of poppies. You all seeing that?
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
So now this was a much larger painting that I had made in the past and sold last year. So I'm doing a mini version of it today. But let me just send that file really quickly through the chat for anybody that doesn't have it.
I don't know how to get it from the chat, probably.
So if are you on a laptop or an iPad?
iPad.
iPad. Okay, that might be trickier then. But there should be a little button somewhere that says chat, and if you open it up, the file will be there for you to download.
Okay.
But if not, it is also you would have an email from me too with the
Yeah.
image in it. You could pull it up from that. Or you could just, where we're headed now, so you can just kind of follow along with me and not worry about it too. That's fine too.
That
Anyways,
helps.
at least you have some sense of what I'm doing. All right.
Yeah.
So there's our first distant mountain. And now I'm going to do a second plane that kind of comes up right here. And comes down this way. I like to sketch very loose so it feels kind of non-committal. Maybe I have commitment issues, but yeah, I try not to get too attached to anything in my work too soon, because you always want to be able to make changes. All right, so now there is a third hill, and that one comes to on the right side just below the halfway point. So if this is the halfway point, that hill I would say is about here, and then on this side it comes to about here. So this is another trick you can use when you're sort of sketching things out, is to just give yourself some little tick marks like that, and then you just connect the dots. When you're doing a landscape, I think that the most important thing to just start thinking about and wrapping your head around is how the space is broken up into foreground, middle ground, and background, because you're trying to create a sense of depth on a flat surface. So as soon as you can begin imagining walking into that scene yourself, the easier it's going to be for you to convey that. And we'll talk a lot more about that as we go along. How do you create a sense of depth on a flat canvas? How do you create what's called atmospheric perspective? All right, so now I'm going to quickly sketch in some simple shapes for the poppies. I'm not going to get too obsessive about that just yet, but I want to start with, there's a big one right here in the front. In fact, at first I might just use kind of an oval, just a kind of a blobby oval shape, because I'm just using it for placement. I'm not really getting very specific just yet. Simple shapes are good to start. A little jelly bean. All right. One important principle of perspective, whether you're drawing or painting, is the simple concept that things have to get smaller as they get farther away from you. So this poppy in the foreground is huge because it's right in front of us, but then we have some that are farther back. So I'm going to do another one here. You don't have to put your poppies exactly in the same place as mine. Arrange them in a way that you feel works well on the painting. That's one of the advantages that we have as painters, or if you're drawing, whatever medium you're using, you can actually make improvements if you want to. A photographer can't do that as easily unless they're, manipulating it in Photoshop or something. But I always think about all of the different elements that I'm adding to a painting as, being a tool for leading people's eye through the image. So each one of these poppies I'm placing because I want to move people's eyes back through the scene. You almost want to think of it kind of in an abstract way. And I'm trying to make them all a little bit different. You don't want to get too repetitive. That can get boring. So, different sizes, kind of like leaning different directions, different at different positions in relation to this line. So I've got 3 that are sort of crossing, halfway right now. So I'm going to make this one go all the way above. Just put as many as you want in there. I'm going to do another big one right up here. How's everyone doing so far? Anybody panicking yet? I don't want panic. Just checking. If you ever feel panicked, let me know. It's supposed to be relaxing. I don't have that. Oh, go ahead. Okay, one more here. I think that'll do it for me. Oh, I lied. I'm going to do one more. I see another one kind of tucked away back here. Overlap is good. I'll do one that's kind of. Okay. All right. So I have the main elements now on the canvas, and that's all I really feel that I need to draw. Because if I were to go in and draw all the stems and all the tiny little flowers that also kind of speckle the foreground, all of that will get covered up as I am painting. Now, if you're drawing or if you're doing watercolor, you may want to go in and do, sketch stems and maybe even sketch some of the placements of little flowers so that you can sort of work around those areas. However, if you are working in graphite or something, you can also use your eraser and lift up highlights as you go to. So my next step when I do a painting like this often is to do something similar to that. I like to kind of do a what's called an underpainting, where you just sort out the value structure of the piece before really getting into color too much. So I like to figure out where the lights, the middles, and the darks are. And when I squint my eyes, which is a trick I use a lot, and it's very helpful when you're doing plein air painting too, because all the details can become so overwhelming when you're working from life. But if you squint your eyes, it eliminates the detail and you focus on the main sections of value. And so I try to look for, where do I see the lightest lights, the darkest darks, and the middle tones. And so I'm going to just take a clean brush and put pure Turpenoid on it. Now, if you're not working in oil, this process won't work for you. You could just use one color if you want to do an underpainting, like an acrylic or something, and mix up some different shades. So add white to make it lighter. But what I'm going to do here is just use my Turpenoid and kind of scrub it in where I want highlights. You could, again, like if you're working in acrylic, you could do the same thing just by adding white paint if you want to. And it's also not a necessary step. Some people go right to color right away, but especially when I'm teaching, I think it can just be really helpful to separate out thinking about value structure from worrying about color. So I'm going to go through very quickly here and do a very loose underpainting just with different shades of brown so that I can figure out where the lights, middles, and darks are of my image. Very much like using an eraser. All right, and then I just kind of take my paper towel or a rag, use a rag if you want, and just lift it up. Now I will eventually paint over top of all of this. This is just to get something on there. All right, so now I'm going to come down here and put darker value to bring the foreground forward. While I do that, I might shape my flower a little bit better. Or at least start to think about that. Doesn't have to be perfect. I try not to make things too smooth or too perfect. Just get some brush strokes on there. Personally, I like for my paintings to look like paintings. So I don't try to overly blend. That's just not my style. I appreciate it in other artists, but I think a little bit more about texture. I like when I'm painting something like this with grass or something, I try to think about what would that surface feel like? And then I paint it to reflect that. I also like to do a lot of painting with my palette knife too. I'll demonstrate that for you here in a bit also. Palette knife is this little tool that you can mix paint with, but you can also actually paint with it too. All right, got the grass in the foreground. One of the ways that you can start to create a sense of depth or atmospheric perspective in your piece is to have shifts in the value from the foreground to the background. If everything is the same, it flattens it out. But if you can start to see different values in each place, then you'll start to create more of that sense of depth on the page. So I'm going to scoot back here to this middle area, and I'm going to paint it. I'm going to make it a little bit darker, but not much. And I'm varying this just by the amount of paint that I have on my brush and how much medium I'm using with it. So it's almost like this stage for me handling the paint like I would watercolor. Just very thin, using the white of the canvas to help create those highlight areas. Okay. And it's all very loose. All right, now my distant mountain is darker on top and then lighter at the bottom. So I'll do darkness up here. Just yell at me if I am going too fast. If you need me to repeat anything, or if you want me to just chill out for a minute.
I love how doable this is, Paul. It's so much simpler than making up 5 piles of different values and all that. It's great.
Yes. It's quick. And I think that's one of the things I like about it, because I'm very impatient. Right. I want to get this done so I can start playing with color.
Well, and also you can so quickly see if you've got your value right.
Yes. I do think there's a real benefit to separating out the process of thinking about value from thinking about color, because it can be very overwhelming when you're trying to figure out, what shade of green should something be, let alone what value of green does it need to be. But if you sort it all out this way ahead of time, then you've given yourself a roadmap for the value, and you can focus more on things like the temperature of the color. Does it need to be a little warmer or cooler, and other things that you might not think about if you hadn't done that.
You have to put value in every painting, even if it's abstract. You have to have value in it.
I mean, I'm never one to say you have to do anything, but I think that it's pretty hard to avoid, because even if it's a monotone painting with one color and one value, it still has a value. So everything from black to white and all the shades in between are different value points. So, and of course, if you're trying to make something look realistic or create a believable space, then definitely having shifts in value will help with that. But even in abstract art, there's a lot of the same considerations. You want to think about, how do people's eye move around your piece, or what's the focal point? Where do they look first, and what's the energy of the piece? And all of that can be aided by having an understanding of how to work with value. So for example, in this finished painting, that big poppy in the front really stands out for one reason, because of the size, but also because it has the most value contrast of anything in the piece. It's got the lightest lights inside of it against the darkest darks around it. And so you can use that idea in abstract painting too, to help kind of control how the viewers experience your piece. So I think I love working with, I'm not an abstract artist, although I do have abstract areas in my work, but I love working with abstract artists because we're all doing the same thing. Basically, we're trying to create an image that will affect the viewer in one way or another.
Well,
So,
see, that's why I'm taking this course, because it looked abstract-ish.
it is,
That's
yeah.
what I'm a wannabe.
Oh, hey, well, I think you're probably further along than you realize. I don't think anybody's a wannabe. All right, I'm gonna go in and just make some, start to put some shades in the flower here, very loose. Now I did, when I first started out painting, I've been painting my whole life, but I went to art school about 20 years ago, and I did paint a lot more realistic then. I painted a lot, like more photorealistic. I painted very smooth, and you could hardly see the brush strokes. And so I guess you could say I have moved towards abstraction because I'm more expressive now with my marks and stuff. But I appreciate all kinds of art. I love it, even if it's, I think you can actually learn the most sometimes from art that is really different from what you make yourself. So I love studying all kinds of people. All right, you can see I'm just going through and making some very simple marks here to start to indicate where I see darker folds in the petals. Your marks don't have to be exactly like mine. Just interpret it your own way. And while I'm at it, I'm just going around and starting to maybe shape the flower a little bit more too. This is all still very changeable as you go, but it gives you a starting point. Okay. I'm going to do same thing on some of these very quickly. Don't get too worried about details.
When you painted this originally, were you looking at a real picture?
Yes, I had taken a photo. I forget where we were, but I had, it was actually a combination of a couple of photos that I had taken. Oh, there's one more flower I want to add in. And you see, this is the beauty of this technique. I missed it when I was sketching them out, but there's kind of a nice one that's right up here that's leaning. I like that. So I'm going to just sketch it in now, and then use some Turpenoid and lift up some of the highlights. So everything is changeable. That's the really important thing to know here. And there are ways to do this with whatever medium you're using. If you're doing oil and acrylic, I think they're two of the most forgiving mediums, even though a lot of people who've never done oil before are kind of afraid of it. I would say just dive in and try it if you want to. I know somebody had said at the beginning you were wanting to move into oil. Just do it. I think it's you can't mess up, because if you paint something and it looks terrible, you can paint right over it and it will be covered up instantly. With watercolor, you have to be a little more cautious because you can't cover it up quite as much. But I always suggest to watercolorists, just start painting very light. Paint everything in very light values first to make sure you like it, and then go back over it and go darker. All right, this is starting to work. How's everybody else's paintings coming along, or drawings, whatever you're making? Do we have some masterpieces? Good. All right, I'm liking that. All right. Gonna take a drink of water here, give you all a chance to finish up your underpaintings if you're doing that, and then start playing with color.
I got to go take a picture of this picture somehow because it keeps going away.
Oh, a picture of the picture. You know what I can do? Actually, hold on a sec.
Will you email it to me?
You should already have it in your email. I emailed it last night. Check and
I'm
see.
gonna go upstairs and get my husband to print it off because
Actually, before you do that, I might have
Yeah.
your problem solved. There you go. There it is. Oh, did she leave?
Well, I was gonna go.
Come back. I've got it right here. I'll just set it here so you can see.
Okay, I'm still gonna go get him to.
Oh, okay. I tried. All right. Well, in that case, I'm going to put it back up so I can see it better. How's everybody else doing? Anybody need any assistance? Good thumbs up so far? Okay, good. There we go. I love teaching these classes because I just get to hang out and paint something that I want to paint and then visit with fun people while I'm doing it. This is the best. All right, back to work. I'll wait till she comes back though. All right. If you are working with color today, it's probably a good time to start putting out some colors on your palette. When I'm painting, I like to start in the background and work my way forward. So I'll be starting with sky colors. Cleaning out my brush in between. Okay, so the first color I'm going to mix is that kind of warmish blue color that's up here in the sky. So I'm going to take my cerulean blue. You don't normally think of blue as being a warm color. It's typically, you know, what you think of as being on the cool side of the palette, but every color can shift both directions. You can have a blue that is very cool, like this ultramarine blue that has a lot of purple in it right here, or the cerulean blue, which is a little bit closer to green, which is a little bit closer to the warmer colors, with yellow and then orange and then red. So if you picture the color wheel, every color can kind of shift both ways. Just look at these two reds, for example. This red here is very orange, so it feels warmer. This red is purplish, so it feels cooler. All right, so I'm taking some of my cerulean blue and I'm adding just a little bit of white to it. White's pretty powerful color. You don't have to add a lot. You want to kind of do baby steps. And then just to keep it from being too bright and too like right out of the tube, I'm going to add just a touch of this burnt sienna to it, because the burnt sienna.
Okay, what did I miss?
Oh, not much. I'm just yammering away. I was just saying I'm gonna start by painting the sky, and because when I'm doing a landscape, I always like to start with the area that's the farthest away and then work my way towards the foreground. So I'm mixing up the sky color using cerulean blue with a little bit of white, and then I put a touch of burnt sienna in it just to take the edge off, make it a little bit less like right out of the tube, super bright. Burnt sienna is kind of on the orange side of things, and orange is the opposite of blue. So if you ever want to tone down a color, you add in a little bit of its opposite. So that's kind of a long explanation for why I just did that. And then I always like to mix myself a couple of different values of a color. I guess I shouldn't say always, but a lot of times I like to. So I'll mix up a color like this blue and then drag some of it off to the side and put a little bit of white in it. And that'll give me a lighter one, lighter version, lighter value of the same color. And then I also want to take some of that, and I'm going to add a touch of my alizarin crimson to it to give it a little bit more of a purpley feel. I might even do a little bit of ultramarine blue in it too, because I see there's a hint of kind of a lavender color in the clouds, in the shadows of the clouds. So while I'm up there, I'm going to paint that as well. Add a little white, lighten it. Don't stress about getting the exact same colors as me. Just try to get something close. Every landscape painting is really an approximation of the subject. It's not meant to be exact. It's more about capturing the feeling of a place. We think about some of the great artists like Van Gogh and the landscapes that he painted. They capture so much of how those environments made him feel more than anything. That to me is what's really powerful about art. All right. So I have a darker sky blue, a lighter sky blue, kind of a purpley grayish color for the clouds. And then I took a little bit of that and added a lot of white to it. I don't like doing a lot of painting with pure white. So I always, I'll mix up colors that are close to white, but have a tinge of something else in them just to, I feel like pure white, a lot of times when you use it in a painting, it just flattens everything out. So that's why I did that. And then I'm just going to start painting. So I'll go right into my wet paint that I did with the underpainting, because I'm not a fan of waiting for anything to dry. We don't have time for that anyhow. And actually, I think it's kind of nice to have layers of paint that sort of interact with each other. It makes the painting a little more cohesive in the end, I think. So I'm going to come right up here. That's a little dark, so I'm going to go lighter. You want to, be thinking about the values that you have in your underpainting, and you can just grab one color after the next and mix them together right on your canvas. So I'm starting with the sky blue that's up here above the clouds. And I'm not trying to blend it perfectly. I'm leaving it a little brushy. That's totally a style choice. If you want to have a smoother look to your painting, you can blend the paint more. And the same is true for drawings also. You can make your drawings very blended, or you can make them a lot more line oriented. With every medium, there's so many different ways to be expressive with your style. I like to grab different colors each time and let them sort of blend together on the canvas. And if you're working with oils, it's so nice to have that paint already on there, because it makes the paint that you're putting on just glide so smoothly across the surface. You can see every so often I'm grabbing a little bit of my liquid over here before I pick up the paint, and that also helps with that. It makes the paint a little bit just glide like butter. I just did I just clicked the mute all button because there was some noise coming from somebody. I'm not sure who it was, but don't be offended. Feel free to unmute whenever you want to chat with me. All right, so I've got the sky laid in.
Okay, there you go.
Now I'm going to come down into the cloud area. Actually, I want to get my purple first. And when I paint the clouds, I want to build in some shadows because clouds are not just like all white. They have structure and shape as just like anything else. And they also have depth. Some clouds are closer, some are farther away. So I'm just going to come into the cloud area and similar brush strokes. I just kind of do like these little blocky brush strokes like this, a lot of up and down and sideways. And I'm laying in some shadows. Like I said earlier, when I'm painting in oil, I like to go darker first and then kind of build up to light. If you're doing watercolor, you want to do the opposite of that. Same with pencil, usually it's better to kind of build up to dark because it's harder to go backwards. All right, so now I'm going to take my really light, almost white color and paint in the clouds. And just kind of blend it right into the shadows. Try to avoid having any edges that are super sharp. And that's good suggestion for whatever medium you're using. If you want something to feel distant, if you put sharp edges on it, it's going to come forward. Keeping things a little bit softer, a little bit blurrier, pushes them into the distance. Because think about if let's say you're outside in a field and there's a tree right in front of you and you're looking at that tree, everything behind the tree becomes sort of blurry because your eye is focusing on that object in front. And so when you can capture that kind of a feeling in your painting, that makes that adds to the sense of depth also.
Oh, he can't hear me.
I hear you.
What size brush are you using?
That's a good question. This is a 1/2 inch. And my canvas is a 12-inch by 12-inch canvas. And it's one of those slant brushes. I have to confess that I use the cheapest brushes I can find. And it's because I think this brush was probably like 50 cents. Because I've used the more expensive ones and I don't really feel much of a difference. And I'm so abusive to brushes normally when I'm doing my larger paintings that no matter how expensive the brush is, it's going to be destroyed after a painting or two anyway. So this was like I think a very cheap brush that I got at Michael's. And it works just fine for me. Now, if you are somebody who works in a more delicate style with really, really tight details and you want really smooth brush strokes, then there might be an advantage to like nicer, more expensive brushes. But I like the cheap ones. I also kind of prefer softer brushes. This is just almost feels like a watercolor brush, but has a little bit more shape. Okay, see how those clouds are starting to move back into the background.
And how do you get them to move back in the background? Will you tell me that again?
It's keeping the edges very soft is one thing. And then I would say just like pulling in, so whatever color you're using in the sky, I would pull a little bit of that into the cloud. So I'm kind of like going right back into it with a little bit of this light blue that I used in the sky, and I'm using that in the shadows of the clouds too. And that's another atmospheric perspective tip. When you want things to move back in space, use the sky color in them. And we're going to do the same thing when we do this distant mountain. We'll actually use some of these same blues and purples in the mountain, even though if we were actually looking at that mountain up close, I'm sure it would be greens and browns and, you know, not blue. It's not really a blue mountain, but things that recede in space take on the color of the sky. That's probably like one of the most useful tips that you can know as a landscape painter. Make enough of your sky color so that you can mix it into the land, or the water or whatever it is in the scene in the distance. That'll push it back. Now, because I like texture, I'm going to take my little palette knife and I'm going to do a little painting with that too in the clouds. I'm going to take some of my light and maybe even get some more white, make it even lighter. And so the way I like to paint with the palette knife is to kind of scoop up the paint so that it's hard to show you. Let's see. So it's kind of more along one edge of the knife. And then I just scrape it along, kind of like I'm icing a cake. And I don't try to make it perfect. I let the edges be very loose and organic, I guess is a good word. If you've never painted with a palette knife before, if you have one handy, you should try it. It's fun. It's addictive. That's actually kind of how I got over being a really, tight, like kind of photorealist painter. I was getting bored with that, and I was feeling like I wasn't really expressing myself enough. So I gave myself the challenge of making a painting without using a paintbrush. So I ended up using a lot of palette knives and spatulas and my fingers and whatever I could get my hands on that was not a brush. And ever since then, I've just been really addicted to that. But I'm not like someone who says you shouldn't use a brush at all. Now you see I use the brush too. I like to combine them. How's everybody doing? Anybody need any assistance with anything? Any advice? Okay. All right, I'm pretty happy with the sky. It's I try not to get too judgy about anything in my painting too early, because this up here is going to look totally different when there are other colors in front of it. Everything with color is relative. So this looks one way now. It will look totally different when there are other colors next to it. And so I just call it, you want to just cover the canvas. That's what we're doing right now. And then we'll kind of evaluate and figure out what we need to do next. So the next thing, I'm going to keep working my way towards the front. I want to do this distant mountain now. And like I was saying, I'm going to use a lot of the sky color in there, and that's going to help to make that mountain feel like it's far away from us. So I'll use a lot of what I have mixed here already, but I want to give myself maybe one or two more shades that might go a little bit more in the lavender direction. So I'm going to use my ultramarine blue, which is a really nice, deep, dark, rich, cool blue. And then I'm going to use my alizarin crimson. If you're trying to make purple, you don't want to use a red that has a lot of orange in it, because that we'll make it kind of lean more towards brown. That's super dark, which is not what we need. So I'm going to add some white to it also. There we go. Of course, you can also just buy purple. That's an option too. All right. It's also a little bit of a pinky color. So I'm gonna take a little bit of this, add some more red to it, some more white. Still on the purple side, but has a little bit more of a pink to it. So I'm an artist that likes to mix kind of pre-mix a lot of things on the palette. And you'll see me doing that as I go through the different stages of this painting. That doesn't mean that you have to do that. Some artists will just squirt out colors from their tube and sort of mix with their brush as they go, or mix on the canvas. And that may be a method that works better for you. So I never try to make it seem like there's any one way that you have to do anything as an artist. You have to really find your own way and what works best for you. But I like to pre-mix because I like to have complex colors in the painting. I don't want my painting to just look like it's the colors that came right out of the tube. And so for me, it's easier to just kind of mix some colors ahead of time. All right, so looking at the mountain, the darkest part of it is along the top, and then it gets a little bit lighter kind of in the valley area and a little bit pinker. So I'm going to start with my darker blue, my darker purple, maybe even grab a little of both. Get it even more mixed. And then I'm going to start laying that in to my mountain. A little too much medium in there. That's why it's looking so. There we go. Since there's already paint, if you're working in oil anyway, since there's already paint on the canvas, you don't need to use a lot of liquid because it will already mix with what's there. Just like when I painted the sky, I'm sort of grabbing different colors each time I go for the palette. I like to, almost like in impressionist paintings where you just see lots of different colors of brush strokes that are all next to each other. I like that too. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter up towards the top of the mountain. And the reason is so that it won't have a super sharp edge. Same thing that I was kind of talking about before. When you want things to recede into space, you don't want to go super sharp or contrasty on the edges. So by going lighter at the top of the mountain, it kind of just makes it gradually fade into that sky a little bit more. Oops. And it's okay when you're painting, if you're, especially if you're working in oil or acrylic, I should say, if you go into a flower a little bit, it's better to paint into a foreground object than to be too cautiously painting around it where it ends up looking like it has kind of a halo. So because we'll cover that when we go in and paint the flower. All right, let me keep going here on my mountain. Getting a little bit lighter as we go down. I'll start pulling out a little bit of that pink too over here, or the lavender, I guess is better description of that. So we just had a technical issue and I lost all of my friends on Zoom. I'm so sorry, you guys. I don't know what happened. My internet went out. So I'm going to continue this painting so that everybody can get the video afterwards. And I do apologize to those of you who were here with me live. I've never had that happen before. I hope you'll come back and join us for another class and not be dissuaded by that. So anyhow, back to work. All right, so I am painting away on this background mountain. And I'm using my blues, my purples to make it recede in space. And then, like I was saying before we cut out, then I'm going to switch to lighter colors right down here, kind of in the more of the valley of the mountain. So my lavenders and my pinks down here. There we go. And see how that just kind of creates a little bit more of a feeling of depth with that mountain. It doesn't feel like a flat wall back there, but it's actually, coming down and moving forward. Okay, so I've got my distant mountain kind of laid in with the brush. And now I want to take my palette knife, just do a little bit of palette knife work back there too, just to give it some added texture. Do the same thing with my blue. There we go. Okay. All right, now I'm going to move into this middle ground area. And it's sort of a combination of greens and some oranges and browns. So that means time to mix some more colors on my palette. I have this dark Viridian green here, which is a very strong, it's a beautiful color, but it's a little too strong for what I need. So I'm going to tone it down with some yellow ochre. There, just gives it a little more of an earthiness. The Viridian by itself has a lot of blue in it. Okay, a little more even. And I might take some of this light color that I had used in the clouds. The more I can kind of incorporate colors I've already used, I find that helps to make the painting more cohesive overall. Just moving the same colors through the piece. So there's one shade of green, and now I'm going to just take some of that off to the side and lighten it. So I have some options. like my options. And then do the same thing with some kind of orange or earthy orange tone. So I'm going to use my burnt sienna. Also mix some yellow ochre in with that. I like that color. Maybe even take a little bit of this lavender and put it in there just to take the edge off. Okay, now I'll mix a more orangey color too. So yellow with some of my cadmium red. Oh, that's super bright. So tone it down with some lavender and some white. Maybe a little yellow ochre too. Color mixing is always an experiment. It's a fun experiment. And if you end up with a color that's not exactly what you wanted, I think it's a really good challenge to figure out how to fix it. Think about the color wheel, and if it's too bright, for example, like we talked about, add in the opposite color. Or if you want to move it towards a warmer tone or a cooler tone, just take a moment and really like evaluate what needs to happen in order to make that color become what you want it to. Okay, I like those colors. So now let me work on this area. So I'm going to start with the green because that's a little bit of the darker tone, and I see that's sort of moving the most through this middle space right here. Okay, got my green. And then I'm going to go right next to that with the browns and oranges and let those colors mix together because I don't want them to feel too separate. It's all a part of this same hill. So just kind of let the colors, and like I said before, I don't overly blend. I like to keep my brush strokes a little bit patchy and be able to see, one color right next to the other. It's that impressionistic idea of the optical blending. You put the two colors together. So for example, Monet might have put blue and yellow next to each other in lots of little dabs. And then when you step away from the canvas and look at it from a distance, you see green. It's kind of nice to make the viewer do a little bit of the work for you. Okay. All right, and bring some more orange and brown down into this part. Go. Maybe even grab some yellow ochre. Just like to have a lot of colors to play with. See them interacting with each other. Let's go with that. There we go. And I'm going to bring a little bit of the green down here too, so it doesn't feel so different above and below. Okay. And just like I did in the background, I'm now going to use the palette knife a little bit. Just make some more texture in there. Let's see. Okay. Oh, that's looking nice. How's yours coming? You making a masterpiece out there? I hope so. Everybody who was in the live class with me, you'll have to email me a picture because now I'm dying to know how your paintings turned out. And everybody who was not in the live class, you should do that too. I love seeing your work. So send me an email. Show me how these ended up. All right, that's good for the middle ground. Now I want to move into the foreground and get the green laid in. And then the final step will be going in and doing all of the flowers. So let me mix up some darker greens now. We'll still use some of these to connect it with the middle ground, but I'm going to mix up some darker greens now. So I'll take my Viridian, use a little bit more of it this time with a little bit of yellow ochre. Get one version of a dark green. I like to have different temperatures of color, like we were talking about before, warms and cools. So we'll have one of the greens that's really dark that I've added even a little bit more blue to. Got dark, some middles, and light. I think that should be good. All right, let's go. When I paint grass and plants in the foreground, I really like to use a lot of expressive marks. It'll make it come forward more if you have more interest going on in those spaces. And then after I do it for a while with the brush, then I'll go back with palette knife too. And just think about the texture. And it's okay to pull some of it right up into the hill behind it too. You want to create that feeling of the overlap. You can go ahead and drag your stems down too if you want. Actually, I might wait on this one because it overlaps this. I'll do the one for this though. Okay. This is fun. I love doing texture like this. And you can see I'm painting thicker with the brush too. I'm letting the actual thickness of the paint create some of that feeling of texture. And I'm trying to move towards darker at the bottom. I think that will make it come forward more. That's not a rule like for every landscape, but in this particular one, since there's so much light in the distance, I feel like darker in front is a good option. And just keep grabbing different colors. Occasionally you might need to clean out your brush if it gets too loaded. Just wipe it off. Keep going. Look at how grassy that's starting to look. There we go. Getting a lot of depth in here. If you're working with pencils, this is where you're going to want to pull out the soft leads, the B pencils that will go really dark. Might run out of paint. I might have to mix a little bit more before I can finish this part. That happens sometimes. And if you don't mix the exact same color again, that's okay. Just get it somewhere close. I still have enough of my dark, my middle. Just need a little bit more of the light. There we go. Okay, keep going. And like I said before, it's okay to paint into the flower a little bit. It's better to do that than to be too cautious around it. You want the background to feel like it continues. You know, it would look the same whether that flower was there or not. And if you do too many brush strokes that are really cautiously trying to avoid the flower, then it feels a little too forced. So just paint right into it. It's okay. Okay, almost done. I'm gonna go a little bit bluer back here, just because that kind of picks up on the sky color as well. And like I was saying earlier, whenever you want an area to reseed, just throw in a little bit of sky color. And I want the back, the back of the foreground, the back of the front to feel farther away from us than this part. So blue, using the blue from the sky is one way to do that. A little lighter. Also, you want to make your brush strokes in the distance, the grass, a little bit smaller than they look in the front. So I'm actually going to go back in over here and just kind of make some of those a little more obscured. Save the really prominent ones for the front. Okay. Let me get some darks. Just do one more pass down here. I want to make sure I covered everything. And it's nice to sort of come back to the bottom again and do some brush strokes there, because then those will overlap everything behind them. Okay. All right, that's looking good. How are yours coming? Everyone doing all right? Okay. I'm going to mix up some flower colors now. Got my yellow. Gonna mix a little bit of this orange I already have into it, just really brighten it up. I want to have some really strong, warm tones to use here. And I'll be able to use those again too, but I'm also going to mix some really bright oranges and reds, and I want these flowers to really pop. Okay, take some of the yellow, add some white. Take some of this orange, add some of the yellow. Sometimes when you mix a few colors, a nice way to get some more variety is to just mix two of your mixed colors together. Okay, so I've got some bright oranges, yellows. I've got my little bit more neutral oranges, which would be good to throw in. All right, let's paint these flowers. Are you ready? All right. So I'm going to start with the shadows. I like to get those sort of worked out first. So I'm going to take my really bright reddish orange and come in and start painting in some of the shadow shapes that I see. We're still just sort of in the block in stage. See, I'm just sort of picking up on some of the subtle shapes that create the folds, the three-dimensionality of the flower. Yours don't have to look exactly like mine. Just try to paint what you see. Okay, I'm going to do that part on all of the flowers, and then go back and do the lighter colors. Right. Each one's a little different. Some of the flower bit, it has to do with the way that they're positioned. If they are facing toward the light or away from the light, the shadows and the highlights will be different. So you have a lot of flexibility to play. This isn't about making them look perfect. It's just about creating some variety. I think I got carried away and painted over one here, so, or maybe I never drew it, I don't know, but I'm gonna put another one right here. So you can do that. You can just go right into the wet paint as long as you don't mush it around too much. You can just paint one color right on top of another. All right, get this one in. Okay, almost there. Two more. Okay, so now I have some shadows on all of the flowers. So now I'm going to go in with my really bright yellows and hit the highlight areas. Just like with the rest of it, I'm not going to worry about overly blending. I'm just getting the color blocked in for now. This is also a good chance to clean up any edges that need it. As you're painting, just think about these as though they were, three-dimensional objects, not just shapes on a flat canvas. Really imagine your paintbrush is reaching in and wrapping around all of the different folds. The more you can kind of convince yourself of that as you paint, the more believable it's going to come across. If you accidentally grab some of the green or, colors merged together that you might not have intended, that's okay. Just leave it for now or try to kind of work it in a little bit. But you would see greens reflecting into these flowers if they are, surrounded by so much green. Color is very reflective, and whatever colors are around an object will show up inside of that object, inside of that flower. Apologies for the sound of the lawnmower in the background. Having all kinds of technical issues today. Clearly, they did not know we were having our class up here. Okay. Go. See how loose I'm being, especially with these smaller ones, because I don't want them to look too detailed. Where the focal point is this one in the front, so I will be going back and adding more to that one, maybe doing a little bit more to some of the others too, but I like to use detail as another way of indicating focal point. Okay. Okay, now I want to use my lighter yellow. I'm actually going to add even a little more white to that, because I want to go back in now, and I'm using really thick paint, almost to kind of simulate what it would look like on the palette knife, and pulling in some little sort of like one stroke highlights. If you blend it in, especially when the paint's this thick and this wet, it'll all just kind of turn to mush. But if you can leave it a little bit, just one stroke like that, it'll really enhance it, I think. Gives it more texture, more depth. The key is thick paint and don't overwork. Do a little bit of that on some of the others, not as pronounced. Still have that floating flower up there. Need to give it a stem. Okay. Clean out my brush. All right, let me do a stem on this. And then I want to go into the stems. I'm going to mix up an even lighter green. And just add some highlights to some of the stems so that they don't look too flat. Keep it very loose. Actually, I'm going to just pull a few other tall lines up through here. Break that up a little more. And one fun thing you can always do, I want to reshape this flower, got a little out of control. You can just go back around it with your dark green and reshape it. You're never stuck with something. If you're unhappy with an area, you can always go back and revise it. I'm going to put a stem on this one. And also bring out this area kind of underneath a little more. There we go. I might even put a few little dark spots inside this one. The more contrast of light and dark, the more it will come forward. I'll do a little bit down here too. Just to suggest like shadow. Maybe the light really can't reach down at the bottom of the flower as well. A little bit there. Okay, I like that. All right, now I want to bring everything in the foreground a little bit more to life with the palette knife. Gonna need to get a new paper towel for this. All right, I'm gonna start with the flowers. So we'll take some yellow, just kind of drag it through, maybe some of the shadows too. Just adds an element of, makes it feel more organic in a way, like less controlled brush strokes. The marks are a little bit more kind of random and irregular. And I like that, especially for painting nature. Just makes it feel less like, you know, you're less aware of someone's hand having drawn or painted it, and you notice more of just the energy of the feeling of the place. Okay. Make that petal really come forward. Ooh, I like that. All right, now in the green. It's fun to use the palette knife on top of, you know, paint that's already there, texture that is already on the surface, because you're adding more, but you're also kind of dragging and moving what's there, and you just end up with some really interesting marks. Had to tilt my canvas a little so I could get into this here. Ooh, there we go. That's fun. Have to fix that. Sometimes I get carried away with my knife. I'm going to do it less as I move back into this back part. Okay. Let me fix my flower petal here. There we go. And I also want to throw a little bit of some of the orangey colors just in little specks kind of throughout the foreground to suggest like we're seeing hints of other flowers that might be down there. And I'm grabbing a little bit different color each time because you don't want it to be the same. Different sizes too. But don't worry about trying to make them too distinct or look like anything. It's just little specks. Just sort of activate that space a little bit more. I don't want to stop. This is too much fun. All right. I think that's good. One more. Okay, I'm done. I'm stopping. All right. Let's see here. Is there anything else that this needs? Give you a little stem. A little bit more of my light blue and just kind of one more time lighten it even more. Just push this back part of this hill back a little farther. It's good to, once you've established foreground, middle ground, background, I think as a final step, kind of making each of those spaces have their own foreground, middle ground, and background within them enhances the sense of depth so much more even in your piece. So I might do that. I might come back and do that up here as well. Just a little bit of the blue at the very top of this one. Just hit and miss. So it feels like it's kind of reflecting that sky, rounding around that back part of the mountain a little. All right. Well, I think we have a finished masterpiece here. If I had anybody hanging out with me, this would be where I would say, show me yours, but I can't do that right now. But still, show me yours. Email them to me. Send them to paulrichmond@artmakesus.com. I would love to see how your paintings turned out. Thank you all so much for being a part of this class. My apologies for the technical issues. Hopefully it won't ever happen again. Please sign up and take some more classes with us. We have a lot of fun things coming up soon, and we'd love for you to join us. So happy painting, everyone. Thank you all for being here, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.